Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing remarkably well. Lots of hugs to each and every one that's listening, and I'm so glad you've joined me for part 3 today, and it's a very exciting story. Oh goodness gracious me, the webs we weave when we try to get ourselves out of trouble, then we can bring ourselves into even greater trouble, which is exactly what happened at the White Owl Inn, when the two well-meaning owners of the inn just were desperate to get rid of Mr. Reynolds' body because they were so concerned that him dying in the inn would sabotage the success of their business. And lo and behold, 2 Bigfoots went and took Mr. Reynolds away and put him in a farmer's field. So let's see where the story goes to from here. It's very interesting, and I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. So let's continue with part 3 of our story. Laurie Parnell's account, 7 months later. My wife Peggy looked up at me. Frustration was written on her face. She looked worn out, jaded and fatigued from 7 hours spent on the road, where we were travelling all the way from our home in Buffalo, New York to Vermont. I was the one that always chose to do the long-distance driving. My wife had never been a particularly patient traveller. She loathed spending more than 2 hours in a car at a time. I was heartily relieved that we would soon be at our destination, the White Owl Inn, in approximately 15 to 20 minutes' time. It was fall. The countryside in Vermont was resplendently ablaze with the most glorious colours, as deciduous trees everywhere were lavishly dressed in their opulent autumn finery. Everything was magnanimously painted in showy displays of rich golds, reds, and splendid rusts. It was extremely beguiling. I had decided that such exquisite scenery would be very complimentary, and very appropriate as an alluring, prepossessing backdrop of the photographs that I intended to take of the White Owl Inn and her surroundings. I had assured the owners of the White Owl Inn, Mr. and Mrs. Viceroy, that I would of course be back again during peak season to take some scenic photographs of the sculptural mountains dressed in carpets of glistening white snow, along with pictures of the inn itself, swaddled in its stunning winter finery, where I imagined the cosy crackling fires would bring the quintessential romantic gloss to any of my brochures. In my opinion, autumn was a quintessential perfect time of the year, so often overlooked, where I could produce some excellent snapshots of the abundant natural world, where she expressed her prepossessing beauty unabashedly. As a photographer, I employed the benefits of nature to enhance the appeal of my photographs, so they became postcard perfect. Shall we say, me and my wife Peggy had been invited to the White Owl Inn, courtesy of the Viceroys, to do a glossy cover spread for a magazine, as well as putting on some online profiles on the net, in order to help the White Owl Inn galvanize that much-needed publicity, as it had only recently opened its doors to the public. The owners were eager to generate as much business as possible, so in this regard advertising was extremely crucial for them, and they were eager to do a cover spread before the winter finally rolled in. I was hopeful as a result of my footage of the inn, the couple would receive lots of bookings from interested parties, looking for the perfect alpine retreat or escape, if you like, where they could thoroughly enjoy a spot of skiing, and cosy winter evenings spent luxuriating by romantic log fires, and in true traditional style, telling their loved ones ghost stories. Ostensibly, people loved to flock to the little town of Stowe, with its eclectic vintage shops and old-world charm, and who could blame them for that? Me and my wife Peggy really loved this part of the world very much. We could easily understand why it was popular as a winter retreat for so many people, drawing so many to the small town from all parts of the world. The last time I'd been to Stowe, my wife Peggy had gone into one of those eclectic-looking shops, which sold absolutely everything connected to the dairy cow. Would you actually believe that? You could believe anything in Stowe. I hasten to say when we returned home from our little alpine adventure, She had pretty much brought the entire shop back home with her. She indulged herself with all manner of things, like placemats covered in cows, cow pepper and salt cellars, cow cookie barrels, a cow jug and a set of cow mugs, and even a teapot that was shaped into a cow. Those are the kind of trinket-type shops you can invariably find in a place like Stowe. My wife, of course, was oohing and aahing, as the fairer of the sexes so often does, over everything in the shop, saying, "Oh, Laurie, aren't these cow egg holders just so adorable?" She would look up at me with bright, shiny eyes that were as bright as the stars in the sky, as she examined all these cow accessories with an expression of wondrous awe on her face. "Oh, this is too cute! Look, Laurie, at the cow's face on the cookie barrel! I mean, have you ever? Now, I would like this to store the chocolate chip cookies I bake. Don't you think it would be absolutely perfect in our kitchen?" I would nod at her. Very bored I would be, wondering how she could be so bewitched by all these ridiculously over-the-top knickknacks. But that was Peggy for you, and was probably one of the incongruous reasons I loved this incorrigible woman so very much. Let's just say when Peggy starts shopping in any shop like this, it would seem there is no end in sight. A lot of men would know what I mean by this. Let's just say when Peggy starts shopping in a quirky shop like this, it would seem for her there is no end in sight. She has a remarkable uncanny penchant for picking up pretty useless things. Let's just say the more impractical, the more purposeless and over the top, the better, as far as Peggy is concerned. Regretfully, I have to confess, as a consequence of visiting so many shops like this over the years, during our travels, we have collected many of these dust collectors at home. Peggy, you see, can never settle with just one souvenir, so it's so much easier to leave with a dozen of them, so she doesn't have the grave misfortune of having to choose what item to buy. She would always look at me with a woe-begotten forlorn face, as if her life had come to a tumultuous end, and say, "Oh, I don't know what to do, Laurie. I don't know which one of these ornaments to take home with me. They're all irresistibly cute. I love them all. I mean, look at the salt and pepper sellers. Look at the cookie barrel and the teapot. And the mugs. I mean, what should I do? How can I possibly be expected to choose between these things?" Then would come the very over-exaggerated, excruciating, disquieted expression on her face, as if choosing what to buy in the shop was actually causing her physical distress. I would be the one that wanted to escape the lunacy of the shop. So I would say, "I tell you what, why don't you just take them all and be done with it, so you don't have to choose?" Of course, my wife Peggy was expecting me to say this. Her face would naturally brighten. She'd burst into a happy smile, and she would say, "Of course I should take them all. How silly of me not to think of that before. Oh, Laurie, you are so clever. Why didn't I think of that? I will be relieved to take them all. Now I don't have to choose." I would be very relieved we were finally leaving the store, so my wife's excessive expense on useless items was the very least of my concerns. Even though this part of the world is fabulously good for skiing in winter, as far as I was concerned, I would never want to go skiing again, if I could possibly help it. In my humble opinion, winter sports are overrated, and many of the rich and well-to-do believe a skiing holiday is hip. It's the trendy thing to do. But honestly, I don't agree with that at all. There are lots of things people can do that are cheaper and infinitely more fun than going skiing. And my recent holidays spent with Peggy are testament to that. Apart from anything else, I had completely lost my nerve as far as snow sports are concerned, and you could hardly blame me for that. I'd had a devastating ski accident. It happened to me in Switzerland 5 years earlier. where I was contracted by an American couple from Michigan to take photographs of their holiday resorts in the Swiss Alps for a glossy brochure. I'm not exactly sure what happened to me on that morning that I went skiing with my wife. My memory is a little bleary, I hasten to say. I do remember losing my balance rather precariously when skiing down a treacherous mountain slope that was designed for more advanced skiers. Why had I insisted on tackling that slope? God only knows. I was delusional, I think, fancying myself as a better skier than I actually was. Even my instructor wisely advised me against tackling the slope. But would I listen? Absolutely not. It would seem my mulishly stubborn streak did me no favours. I ended up being flung into a tree very hard, and almost died on impact. I was rushed to the hospital by EMTs that arrived on the scene almost at once. But during my near-death experience, I was left floating above my body until the EMTs began working on me hard, and I can still recall the resigned expressions on their faces. They rarely believed I was a goner. I remember coming back into my body with a huge jolt, and I was angry with those EMTs for reviving me. It all happened so quickly, but when I'd slipped out of my body, I became as free as a bird. I felt as light as a feather, and joyfully full, like a seed floating on the wind. It was a euphoric, dreamy feeling, the likes of such I have never experienced before or since. It has completely expunged any fear of death, as I know now that after my profound, indelible experience, that our spirit lives on after death, and we are so much more than just our bodies that seem to just contain us like a vessel. I do distinctly recall hearing a booming, powerful voice telling me, "It's not your time. You need to go back, son." I looked down at my body very indifferently, and when I realized it was me lying under the tree, in a pathetic crumpled heap, I remember thinking, I certainly didn't want to get back in that loathsome, cumbersome-looking body of mine. It was dreadfully unappealing. I felt no attachment towards my physical body. It did not define me. The real me, or my essence, if you like, was floating above my body. I didn't go down a tunnel with a light at the end that near-death experiences so often speak about. I was so busily preoccupied watching the EMTs working on me. It was rather fascinating to watch. I remember wondering why they were even bothering to revive me at all. I'm not dead, I thought. I'm more alive than I have ever been. I wanted to tap one of the EMTs on the shoulder, tell him to stop trying to revive me. But even when I spoke to him, he failed to hear me. It was extremely frustrating. It was a moment later that I was flung rudely back into my body. I couldn't even argue with the man that had told me to return to it. I had no choice in the matter. There was no negotiation. I never told anyone what had happened to me for a long time, but my wife Peggy did comment that I didn't seem to be terribly grateful to have my life spared, and had become unreasonably grumpy and very rude to the nursing staff at the hospital, which was something I deeply regret. I guess I was just indignantly angry to have been brought back like this. The best way I can describe it is, imagine you get onto an ocean cruise liner. You're going to spend several weeks away in an exotic location, and then maybe you are drawn away from your cruise because your annoying, pedantic, small-minded boss needs to see you about an important matter that he believes simply can't wait. Can you imagine how mad you would be about losing out on this fabulous holiday destination? You wouldn't be particularly enamored with your boss either, would you? You'd feel that you had really missed out on an exciting adventure, thanks to your boss putting a spanner in the works and spoiling everything. That was how it felt coming back into my own body. It certainly didn't help that I was in agonizing pain as well, with a fractured pelvis, a broken leg, collapsed lung, and so many other injuries besides, too many to count, but half of them I've conveniently forgotten all about. To put it bluntly, I was very smashed up, and the Swiss doctors that fixed me had a task putting me back together again, let me tell you. While I was spending time in hospital recuperating from my injuries, some rather idiosyncratic experiences happened to me. I do recall one of the nurses in attendance of me walked into my private hospital ward. I abruptly asked her if her mother had recently died. She looked up at me incredulously and said, "How could you possibly know that?" "As it happens, yes, she did die recently. Why do you ask that?" I continued, "Your mother has had epileptic seizures for all of her life, has she not? She had a nasty seizure, took a tumble down a staircase. You found her, didn't you? It really upset you." The nurse's eyes widened. "Who are you?" she asked me, her face paling. "How can you know all this? You're creeping me out. Who are you that you can know such personal things about me?" "I don't know how I know all this," I replied. "But when I died on the ski slope for a couple of minutes or so, I came back knowing things about people that I can't possibly know. Don't ask me how this has happened." "That is very surprising. If I may give you a word of advice, it might be a good idea if you don't speak of such things to people. You gave me quite the shock talking about my mother like that. But other people might not take this too well, you know." Let me tell you, that was salient advice on the nurse's part that has served me well. So I've tried my level best to hold back my unbridled tongue, when for no reason at all I might know things about people that I cannot explain, and am tempted to say something. Unfortunately, there have been times that my tongue has run away with me, rather like a cheeky, misbehaving schoolboy. Then I say things that invariably ruffle up people's feathers, and furthermore grievously upset my wife Peggy. Ostensibly, Peggy found some of my outbursts very inappropriate, and she was probably right about that. "What the hell is wrong with you, Laurie?" she would say to me on numerous occasions. "Why did you say that to the poor little old dear? I'm so embarrassed by you. There are no words, Laurie, no words. Does that poor woman want to be reminded of a day she almost died? Especially when she's happily shopping in Walmart, putting tins of tuna in her shopping cart. And then there you go waltzing up to her and start telling her all these things about her life. Goodness gracious, I was so dreadfully embarrassed. I wanted the ground to swallow me up whole. The old dear couldn't get away from you fast enough, and as a consequence nearly collided into another shopping cart on her escape. What are you like, Laurie?" I couldn't help it. I was having flashbacks in regards to her life. "Yes, you could help it, Laurie. You didn't have to say anything at all. You can see those flashbacks in your mind and just ignore them. Why can't you be like anybody else? Why do you have to pay attention to those flashbacks?" Little did my poor wife Peggy know, things were going to get significantly worse for her when we arrived at our destination, the White Owl Inn, to meet Mr. and Mrs. Vickeroy. For it would seem my tongue would want to come out again to play, rather like a mischievous toddler escaping the confines of his playpen. And I was not going to hold back on the words that would roll off my tongue so seamlessly. I realized my near-death experience after my unfortunate skiing accident in Switzerland had given me some extraordinary extrasensory abilities that I did not welcome gladly. It was more of a curse than a blessing. This heightened sensitivity of mine had made me sometimes very aware of what other people were thinking or feeling. I remember once when my wife invited a friend for dinner, I could hear her friend, a woman called Cynthia Granger. I could hear every thought that was going on in her head. She was thinking, how long did she have to sit at our dinner table, pretending to enjoy herself? "I've got such a thumping headache," she was thinking. "I really want to leave now. But Laurie and Peggy are so desperately nice. They've gone to so much trouble on my account. I'm just going to have to grin and bear it, and pretend to be enjoying myself and having a good time. But boy, I wish I could get back home. This migraine headache of mine is killing me. My head is absolutely throbbing. When you hear thoughts like that over a dinner table, it can make the experience exceedingly uncomfortable for you, especially when you realize your guest doesn't wish to be present with you and is clearly not enjoying themselves, and besides anything else, has a thumping migraine headache. And believe me, I know all about those, being a migraine sufferer myself. I remember I walked over to my wife's friend with a couple of headache tablets that I knew were extremely effective, for I took them for my own migraines that had become significantly worse after my skiing accident in Switzerland. I handed her the pills and a glass of water. "What is this for?" she asked, looking at me in surprise. "For your headache, of course, Cynthia. You've got a thumping migraine, haven't you? These tablets are excellent. It'll take your migraine away." Cynthia's eyes naturally grew round with surprise. She looked at me rather strangely, like the nurse at the Swiss hospital had done. She thankfully took the tablets from me, popping them into her mouth. I know she was thinking, "How could Laurie know that I have a headache? I never mentioned it to them, did I?" I'm very glad the pill did the trick for Cynthia, as by the end of the evening she didn't want to leave. She had enjoyed our company so much. But being able to hear people's thoughts is not always a reassuring experience, I can assure you. Let's just say before my skiing accident, I had probably been extremely cynical about people claiming to have extrasensory abilities. But after my accident, I would know things I shouldn't know about people, or would pick up feelings and emotions. It was disquieting knowing things I shouldn't know. In truth, it made me feel like a peeping Tom, looking into someone's personal business, even if I didn't want to. On the way to the White Owl Inn, I had a profound sense that something rather idiosyncratic was going to happen there during our stay. I had a feeling the Viceroys were sitting on a secret, that they had kept cloak and dagger for fear of any publicity concerning this matter that might jeopardize the success of their business. Where this information was coming from, I did not know. I could only wonder what the couple were hiding. They seemed nice enough folk to me on my video chats with them. I remember fighting the awe-consuming feeling away, as I always did when these knowings would take hold of me, trespassing into my mind like unwanted house guests that were not at all welcome. The last thing I wanted to do was to upset my wife Peggy again by saying something extremely inappropriate. I was determined that on this little business trip of ours, I would hold my tongue. I thoroughly enjoyed my job as a professional freelance photographer, doing cover shots for hotels, restaurants, and venues alike. I hoped that me and my wife Peggy and our stay at the White Owl Inn would be a pleasurable experience for the both of us. We worked together as an efficient professional team, and my wife, like myself, was an outstanding photographer. Since we had married all those years ago, we had decided to make a profession out of our passion, and it had served us both very well. I had never been the conformist type, so for me engaging in a 9-to-5 job would have left me tearing my hair out in frustration and would have literally beaten the life out of me. Thankfully for me and my wife, I'm glad to say that our hard work and dedication to our business paid off exponentially. But in the very beginning, when we first started our business, we had been living on baked beans for months on end. But we persevered over the rocky, rather tumultuous challenges along our way, and in the end our patience paid off. But it was a long, rather precarious road. Our photography had taken us all over North America, and even around the globe. We loved every minute of pursuing our dreams, and had promptly decided we would put off having any children for a while. But now Peggy was reminding me almost every single day that she was 36 years old, and her biological clock was beginning to tick very loudly. Peggy looked good for her age. I couldn't fault her appearance. She could have easily been in her late 20s rather than middle 30s, with her fresh, dewy complexion and her big brown spirited eyes that looked as innocent as that of a doe. I, on the other hand, looked infinitely more frayed, worn out and weathered. Time had been less favourable to me. It would seem after the skiing accident I had lost all my hair, probably from the physical shock of the experience. But Peggy kindly told me that my shiny bald head suited me. I'm not sure I agreed, as when you looked at my face, my dark eyebrows looked so much more prominent now, as if I was wearing two great big black caterpillars above my blue eyes. But Maggie once again assured me very tactfully that she rather liked my caterpillars. She even gave them pet names. Much like Peggy, I wanted to have a couple of children myself, and would also like to have a couple of dogs running around our home. So I knew in due course our lives would invariably change. I would have to go solo with the photography, while Peggy became a stay-at-home mum full-time. So I wanted to make the most of the time we had together, working as a team. When we both arrived at the White Owl Inn, we were cordially, warmly welcomed by both Mr. and Mrs. Viceroy, whom I liked immediately. They were a wholesome, genuinely friendly couple, and were eager to get their business off the ground. I have to say they'd absolutely transformed the inn into a very romantic alpine retreat. When Peggy saw the inn for the first time, she said, "Oh, goodness gracious me! This place is so enchanting, so dreamy. Oh, I'm going to love staying here. Taking pictures of this place. Oh, the views, Laurie. They are spectacular, are they not?" "They sure are idyllic," I agreed. My wife turned for a brief moment to look at me, from the passenger side seat where she was seated. Her eyes fixed on me with a rather formidable look, and I could predict what was going to happen next. I could even envisage the very words she was about to utter. "Now, I don't want you making any outrageous statements to the Viceroys. Do you understand, Laurie?" she said, looking at me accusingly. "I don't care what psychic impressions you get of this place or of the Viceroys themselves. If you get any of them, for God's sake, will you shut them down? I don't want you embarrassing me again. I couldn't bear it if you did that. I want us to have an enjoyable time here, Laurie. The last thing I need is for you to become like a cat among the pigeons. Do you understand what I'm saying?" "But of course, my sweet cherub. Would I ever do anything to upset you? You know me." "Oh, of course I know you, Laurie. That's the problem. I know you too well. You're as predictable as the weather. Now don't you dare act innocent, Laurie. You know very well you've ruffled people's feathers more times than I care to remember since that accident of yours in Switzerland. It's the people we meet that may be on the receiving end of some of the things you just randomly blurt out without applying any thought. If you can read their minds or see something, for goodness sake, keep those thoughts to yourself. No one wants to know what you're thinking, least of all me, especially not me." "Oh, don't be like that, sweet cherub. I'm not that bad. You make me sound like an impossible dog that can't be controlled." "But you are like an impossible dog, Laurie, that can't be controlled. That's the problem. I may remind you, in case you've conveniently forgotten, our job is to dazzle the Viceroys with our breathtakingly beautiful photographs and put their little inn on the map for them. Nothing more and nothing less. They're paying us generously, and I don't need you spoiling things for us by blurting out something random and inappropriate, like you did last time with the Madisons. When you told poor Mrs. Madison about the baby son that everybody had forgotten about, that died in a cot death years before, I couldn't believe you could be so blazingly insensitive towards the women. But you couldn't keep your zip shut, could you, Laurie? Poor Mrs. Madison. She didn't need to be reminded of such a traumatic time in her life. But no, you come along like a great big bull in a china shop and tear the Band-Aid off her. So the wound of her grief is open again, left to bleed. You really upset her, even though she was polite about it, but I could see the grief in her eyes all too clearly. And what about that poor dear at Walmart, when you practically accosted the perfect stranger, blurting out to her about a near-death experience she must have had? You can't behave like that, Laurie. I'm sorry, but it's not normal behavior. Ever since that skiing accident of yours, you've become as wild and untamed as a stallion that has been broken in and needs to learn to behave itself." I made a mock salute at my wife, and cheekily said, "Aye, aye, sir. I promise you I'll be on my best behaviour today, Peggy. Are you happy now?" My wife rolled her eyes in the back of her head, as if she found me absolutely exasperating. I'm sure she did. She said, "Well, I'll have to see it to believe it, Laurie." I knew if people online were to log into my glossy photographs that I intended to take of the White Owl Inn, that the couple, Mr. and Mrs. Viceroy, would get bookings rolling in left, right and centre. I was reasonably confident about the high quality of my work. The Viceroys were a warm, welcoming couple, a nicer people you could not hope to meet. I was impressed by how stunning the renovations to the inn had been, because the couple had successfully maintained the integrity of the former building, which had been rescued, I understand, from a state of very bad repair. It does rather upset me when houses of history are allowed to seep into a rancid decay. Beyond that, the furnishings were unique and invited a sumptuously cosy atmosphere. I could imagine coming back to the inn after a day spent skiing out on the slopes and relaxing by a warm, crackling fire, while drinking back copious mugs of delicious hot chocolate. It is the kind of enchanting little inn from which sweet dreams from nostalgic, wistful memories can easily be made. "So what do you think of the inn?" Mrs. Viceroy asked me, eager to get my opinion on the place. The woman was looking at me inquiringly. "Do you think people will like coming here? We've had a few guests already staying here since the spring. But it is nice getting a professional photographer's perspective on the place. I can see you have an artistic eye, Mr. Margareton. Do you think me and my husband have created the right ambience for the inn? I'm quite happy for you to give me an honest opinion, and I want it to be unbiased. I really like constructive feedback because it means I can make improvements on the place if need be." "Mrs. Viceroy, I am a very honest, straightforward man, and I can tell you honestly, you and your husband should be very proud of your accomplishments. You've excelled yourself. I've seen lots of inns over the years. Yours is up with the very best of them. The inn is spectacular, the views over the mountains idyllic. I imagine any guest coming to stay here is going to be absolutely delighted. Don't you agree, Peggy?" I said, turning to my wife for confirmation of my thoughts. "I agree with my husband. This place is absolutely dreaming. So enchanting. Who wouldn't want to stay here? And I love the name the White Owl Inn. It really suits the place. It's like out of a fairy tale, is it not?" "Oh, I'm so pleased to hear you say that," said Mrs. Viceroy, looking genuinely delighted, her face flushing pink with excitement. "You see, I've dreamed of owning an inn like this for years and years. And now that it's happened to us, well, it's surreal for the both of us. Sometimes I have to pinch myself," she giggled, "and remind myself this place really is ours." "Don't you worry, Mrs. Viceroy. Leave everything to us," I reassured her. "We will get your charming inn on the map for you. We've had much success over the years, me and my wife. We will get some stunning photography done for the both of you that will attract lots of eager holiday makers to stay at your inn from all around the world." Mrs. Viceroy looked absolutely delighted. She waved a hand in front of her face, as if fanning herself. It was almost as if my pleasing words had suddenly made her terribly hot, and she needed to cool down. "I know you will, Mr. Margaretta," she said resolutely, "because I've seen your work. It's stunning. If anyone can put us on the map, it's you and your wife." "You don't need to call me by my surname, Mrs. Viceroy. I'm Laurie, and my wife over here is Peggy. We never stand on ceremony." "Oh, I'm glad to hear you say that. You can call me Kim." The Viceroys took me around the inn, and my wife appropriately oohed and ahed over the fabulous setting, and how much we were eagerly looking forward to taking photographs for the glossy magazine spread. It was when I entered the living room my demeanour changed almost at once. My attention was drawn to the couch, and I got flashbacks in my head of a man sitting on the couch. But the man was not alive. He was deceased. Then I had very disturbing flashing images of the Viceroys themselves trying to move the body, on a blue plastic tarpaulin of all things. The shocking imagery was so clearly visible that I was in no doubt that these flashbacks were true, and what was being played to me in my head was real. It was such disturbing imagery that I was suddenly feeling violently sick, but managed to maintain a cool composure. I wondered why the Viceroys had dragged a deceased body through their living room, out of the inn and into the woods. I saw that imagery too clearly. I knew exactly what had happened. I could see flashbacks of Kim, her face all pale and worried looking. And then I heard her saying, "We have to do this. We haven't got a choice." Did the couple have something nefarious to hide, I wondered. I kept getting the name Ian in my head. Was that the name of the man that had tragically died? I wondered, but the big question was, how had he died and why had he died? Did the Viceroys have something to do with his untimely passing? I mean, why hide a dead body if you're completely innocent? I noticed that Kim Viceroy's face had significantly paled when she saw me staring at the couch. "Is everything all right, Laurie?" she asked me. "You look as if you've seen a ghost." "Someone died here, didn't they? On that couch over there," I said rather abruptly, before I had time to guard my very disobedient tongue, that had decided to waggle a little, against my will. "I think his name was Ian. He was an elderly man. I get strange, rather peculiar images in my head, Mrs. Viceroy, of you and your husband moving the deceased corpse, dragging it all the way to the woods. I see a blue plastic tarpaulin was used. Why do I get such disquieting images in my head like this?" I asked her inquiringly, as if I'd just thrown an explosive hand grenade at her. What on earth was wrong with me? Why was I challenging this poor woman, as if accusing her of a duplicitous crime she didn't seem capable of committing? Much like my wife Peggy, Kim Viceroy looked as innocent as a brand new morning. My tongue was getting way too out of control, and I could feel Peggy's indignant eyes burning into me. At that moment, Kim Viceroy's eyes widened. Her face became as pink as a peony. I noticed her husband standing next to her, put his arms protectively around her back, as if he was trying to hold her up, in case she keeled over. Kim looked as if she was about to pass out from the shock of my words, as if I'd just thrown a hand grenade at her. My wife Peggy was poking me furiously in the ribs and giving me an angry glare, as if to say, "Why the hell would you say a thing like that? I thought I warned you, Laurie, about that unbridled tongue of yours. Do you want to have this contract or not? What on earth is wrong with you? Why would you say such crazy, nonsensical, very inappropriate things? Anyone can see the Viceroys are a very amenable couple. Why would you go stirring up trouble like this? Are you completely deranged, off your rocker perhaps?" Those are the words my wife spoke to me in my mind, without even uttering a verbal word. But I heard those words as clear as day, as if they had actually been spoken. My wife managed a watery, half-hearted, apologetic smile at both of the Viceroys. "You must excuse my husband. I don't know what on earth Laurie is talking about. He doesn't half go on. I'm afraid he's inclined to spout nonsense half the time. I'm sure if anyone ever did die in this living room, it probably happened an awfully long time ago, before the two of you even bought this place. Maybe my husband's picking up on an energy of a bygone time and a very lost soul. He's never been the same since he had a skiing accident in Switzerland a couple of years back. Since then, he's impossible to control. He sometimes just blurts out very inappropriate things that don't make any sense at all. He claims to get flashbacks on the past, events that play out in his mind, rather like a movie. You can imagine he's ruffled a few feathers along the way. But take absolutely no notice of him. He has no idea what he's talking about." At this point, my wife turned around to me and cast me a warning glare that was so indignant that if looks could kill, I would have died there and then on the spot. Believe me when I say my wife can fire off a range of looks that would have the army diving for cover. I ignored my wife's furious glares and said, But I do know someone died here. I know they did. Their energy is still strong in this room. And it was a recent death. They died on that couch over there. And why do I get images of you and your husband, Kim, moving the body out of this house, taking it into the woods? What are the two of you hiding? Oh, for goodness sake, Laurie, what on earth is your problem? Said my wife, snapping at me. I've had enough of these rude outbursts of yours. Honestly, listen to yourself. You're practically accusing poor Mr. and Mrs. Viceroy of harming someone. Are you completely out of your mind, love? You can't just go accusing people of stuff like that. This is inappropriate behaviour of yours, and it's got to stop. I've had about as much as I can take, Laurie. I think you need to see a counsellor. You absolutely have no filter. You never used to be like this until that damn skiing accident. I rue the day you ever tackled that ridiculously high slope in Switzerland, which I warned you not to do. But as usual, you would not listen to me, or the salient advice of your ski instructor, who firmly told you in no uncertain terms that you were not good enough to ski down that slope. But no, you stubbornly refused to listen, which is always the story of your life. Then you go colliding into a tree, and almost ended up killing yourself in the process. If you want to talk about psychic abilities, I have them too, you know, Laurie. I never told you this before, but I had a very funny, strange feeling that you'd injure yourself on that mountain slope. Turns out I wasn't wrong. Now let's not kid, that accident in Switzerland did something very weird to your brain. You've never been the same after it. And some of the nonsense you keep spouting is downright embarrassing. At this, Kim burst into tears. Her husband began to console her, while my wife Peggy looked at me as if she would simply like to murder me, or skin me alive, perhaps, with a look that said, "Now look what you've gone and done. This is so typical of you, Laurie. I can't take you anywhere without you rudely disturbing the peace and causing mayhem." I suppose I couldn't blame her for that. Certainly after my skiing accident, I had changed exponentially, and sometimes I didn't seem to have a filter, and would just say things without really thinking about what I was saying. I had excelled myself in causing great upset. The last thing I wanted to do was to make a perfect stranger cry like this. It was not a good feeling. What the hell was wrong with me? Why couldn't I control myself and the words in my mouth that seemed to leak out of me like a dripping tap that you simply can't fix? Peggy was right about me. I would just blurt things out at random. It was driving her completely mad. Despite the fact she loved me, her patience was wearing extremely thin. I was also beginning to lose patience with myself, as I seemed unable to break free from my thoughts. "Look what you've gone and done, Laurie," my wife interjected. "Look how you've upset poor Kim. You've reduced her to tears. I hope you're proud of yourself. Sometimes I'm ashamed to call you my husband." Hearing Peggy say that stung me hard, but I guess I deserved her angry retort. "I am so dreadfully sorry, Kim. I must apologize for my husband," she said, looking at Mrs. Viceroy apologetically. "Please take no notice of him. He can be very uncouth at times, but you aren't the first to be on the receiving end of his very untamed tongue, and I doubt you will be the last." My wife turned around to me abruptly, and with her fingers she pinched me so hard in the back, I almost winced. "Are you going to apologize to Kim, Laurie, for upsetting her? Or am I going to have to get back into our car and drive straight back to Buffalo on my own? I have had as much as I can take of these uncongenial, misguided outbursts of yours, and they've got to stop." "I'm very sorry, Kim. I must apologize. My wife is absolutely right. I spoke out of turn. Honestly, I don't know what came over me back then. You see, after my skiing accident in Switzerland, I tend to sometimes get glimpses of things that might have happened in a place. But I'm sure my timing is all screwed up. I really didn't mean to upset you. You and your husband are very nice people. I tell you what, why don't you show me the kitchen where you make all the delicious meals for your guests you were telling me about? I'd like that very much indeed. Please ignore everything I formerly said. It's probably nothing. My mind is all over the place. I can't seem to establish fact from fiction," I said, giving a mock laugh. "Peggy is right, of course. What I saw in my mind's eye probably happened a long time ago, long before you even acquired the property. I didn't mean to falsely accuse you of anything you obviously didn't do. I'm very, very sorry." "Your flashbacks aren't wrong. Besides, you said you saw me and my husband dragging out a plastic tarpaulin," said Kim, shaking her head while tears spilled down her cheeks, which she wiped away with her fingers. "Don't say anything, love," said her husband, squeezing her hand tightly, trying to anchor her to the spot like a loose tree that was coming unhinged from its roots. But Kim willfully ignored her husband's persuasions and said very matter-of-factly, "You're absolutely right, Laurie. The images that you've been getting in your head, well, they don't deceive you. Someone did actually die on that couch over there, quite recently, actually. He was such a terribly nice old man. His name was Ian Reynolds. He was staying at the White Owl Inn. He loved coming to Stowe, as it was his late wife's Molly's favourite town. We only just opened our doors of the White Owl Inn. He was our 13th guest that we had staying here, would you believe? I've never met anyone quite so melancholic in my entire life. Like poor Ian Reynolds was. I'll never ever forget him. He has a big place in my heart, you know. I felt desperately sorry for the poor man. Tragically, his wife Molly had died of breast cancer 5 years prior. I don't think poor Mr. Reynolds ever got over her passing. And then his daughter Jennifer, who's in her 50s, lives in Ireland. So his whole family was far away from him and couldn't offer him much comfort or solace. I think he felt dreadfully alone in the world. One morning while he was staying with us, I came downstairs into the living room, only to find Mr. Reynolds was sitting on the sofa, but he didn't appear to be breathing. I realised he'd died during the night. It was so desperately sad. "Sweetheart," said Mr. Viceroy, "you don't have to say anything else to Laurie if you don't want to. What happened to Ian Reynolds is none of his business." Mr. Viceroy then turned to me, with a rather fearsome look on his face. "Don't upset my wife, Laurie, any further. She's been through enough already. What happened to Ian Reynolds was not her fault in any way, shape or form. I want you to appreciate that. The man died of a massive heart attack, and that has been confirmed by the coroner in the autopsy report. So no, we did not have anything to do with his death. We are good people, Laurie, and we wouldn't hurt a soul." "I want to tell Laurie what happened," Kim insisted. "So my husband was right then?" asked Peggy incredulously. "And a man called Ian Reynolds did actually die on the couch over there?" She shivered as she looked at the couch, as if the very idea that someone had passed away there rather recently had given her the chills. "Yes, he did," said Kim. "As I was saying, I came downstairs that morning to find Mr. Reynolds sitting on the couch. The room was immersed in darkness because the curtains were drawn. I went over to draw them back and began to chat to him garrulously. I asked him what he wanted for breakfast. You know, that sort of thing, when you try to make cheery conversation with someone. I thought Mr. Reynolds had drifted off to sleep. But when he failed to answer me, I began to panic a little, so I started to shake him, but he failed to respond. I discovered he was deceased, and let me tell you, I freaked out. You can't imagine what it was like to find someone lying dead on your couch." My wife cupped her hands over her mouth in horror, her eyes widening. "You poor thing, Kim. You've just got the White Owl Inn opened, haven't you? And then you find Mr. Reynolds lying dead in the living room. That must have been a dreadful nightmare for the both of you. I can't imagine." "That's exactly what happened. I'm not proud of myself, but I really panicked. And when I say panicked, I was practically having kittens. I probably overreacted, but panic can do that to you, can't it? You don't always think straight when you're a little unhinged. I was so scared of any negative publicity towards our inn. I surmised that if this unfortunate news were to get out, it might negatively affect our business. I think people can get a little funny if they learn someone has recently died at a place. I persuaded my husband to move Mr. Reynolds' body. It's funny that you should describe a blue plastic tarpaulin being used to move the body of Mr. Reynolds, Laurie, because that's exactly what we used to shift his body. We carried him through the house on it, placing him on the back of a 4-seater ATV. Thank God he wasn't a heavy man, because it was an absolute nightmare shifting his dead weight. We moved his body into the woods, so the police would believe that he had collapsed and died after a morning walk. I knew if he was found out of doors, then it wouldn't impact our business so much. Kim began to tell us the rest of this rather extraordinary, unorthodox story. How the body of Mr. Reynolds had mysteriously vanished, and how it was later recovered in a farmer's field 2 hours away. That was part of the story that I found hard to swallow. But after reading the newspaper report that Kim presented to me, I realized the story was indeed true, and I could only marvel that someone had moved the body over barbed wire fencing 2 hours away from Stowe, where it was found paradoxically in a farmer's field, miles and miles away. Now how the hell does that happen? It left me with more questions than answers. But I knew Kim and her husband were innocent in regards to Mr. Reynolds' death. But moving the body in the way they had done was indeed pretty weird. So let's get this right, shall we? You moved Mr. Reynolds' body to the woodgrove on the back of your ATV. You left him lying on a bed of leaves under a tree. You then went back to the inn to call the police, and you took them to the body, only to discover it had vanished. That's incredibly bizarre. Goodness gracious me. I was unable to disguise my obvious confoundment in regards to the matter. I can't answer the questions for you, said Kim. It even befuddled the police. For a second, Kim looked nervously from me to my wife. You're not going to report what we did to the police, are you? What is there to report? I said. You moved a deceased body. Big deal. Dead bodies are forever being moved, are they not, during transportation? I get why you did what you did. Me and my wife Peggy make a living with our photography, and you do what you need to do to put food on the table, as long as it's not hurting anyone, of course. You do understand, then? Asked Kim, looking grateful. But of course I understand. The living need to focus on being able to provide for their families, don't they? And if a deceased corpse has the potential to jeopardize the success of a business, then moving it to a different location makes perfect sense to me. I mean, the man died of natural causes. The coroner was able to discern that from the autopsy report. And yes, it was sad, but it is what it is. By the sounds of things, Mr. Reynolds had a very good life. Nothing to complain about, it would seem. But do you think if people knew Mr. Reynolds died on that couch over there, which we recently got recovered with a different fabric, that it might put them off staying here at the White Owl Inn? Kim asked me earnestly. You must think what I did was really macabre. But I have invested all my dreams in this place. I was really scared that the death of Mr. Reynolds would ruin things for us. What you both must think of us, I can't imagine. To be fair, my husband, well, he wanted no part of this. But I insisted we did this. Kim's husband came to his wife's immediate defense. Sweetheart, none of this was your fault. I was the one that agreed to help you move the body, didn't I? I thought you might be right, and this could jeopardize our business. Yes, but you didn't want to do it, did you? Said Kim defiantly. It was all on me. That's what I'm saying. So there we are. That is the end of part 3 of our story. Part 4 is tomorrow night. Until next time, goodbye and good night.